I have a bad habit of thinking out loud when I'm nervous. Not full conversations with myself. Not the concerning kind. Just small, unfiltered sentences that slip out before my brain has finished reviewing them. My best friend Dammy calls it my mouth betrayal. I call it a minor personality flaw that has never once caused serious consequences. Until the day it ended my career before it started. And somehow, impossibly, began something I still don't have the right words for. It was my third week at Callaway and Reed, a mid-size interior architecture firm with beautiful offices and the kind of silent, intimidating hallways that make you walk faster even when you have nowhere to be. I was a junior associate, fresh out of school, still learning which printer worked and which one would eat your documents and lie about it. That morning, I was standing in the small break room on the fourth floor, talking to Dammy on the phone while making coffee. Dammy wasn't even saying anything interesting. She was eating cereal and half listening while I processed my week out loud, the way I always did. The new head of creative is coming in today, I said, pouring water into the machine. Everyone's acting like the president is visiting. I haven't even seen her yet, but based on the energy in this office, she's either terrifying or incredibly beautiful. Possibly both. Dammy made a noise of mild interest. Someone said she redesigned the Harlow Tower project from scratch in 2 weeks, and the client cried happy tears. Who does that? I leaned against the counter. She sounds like the kind of woman who irons her blazers and has never made a single impulsive decision in her life. I paused. Also, I heard she's single, and I genuinely don't know why I just said that. Ignore that. Forget I said that. Dammy laughed. I heard a sound behind me. Not loud. Not a cough. Not a shuffle. Just a quiet, deliberate placement of a coffee cup onto the counter beside mine. I turned slowly. She was standing 2 feet away from me. Tall, unhurried, wearing a charcoal blazer that looked like it had, in fact, been ironed. She was looking at the coffee machine with the calm expression of someone who had decided not to react to what they just heard. Her face was composed, beautiful in the specific way that made my brain suddenly forget the order of the alphabet. She pressed the button on the machine. Waited. Then, without turning to look at me, she said quietly, I don't always iron them. Sometimes I steam. I stopped breathing. She picked up her cup, finally looked at me. Her eyes were steady, dark, entirely unreadable. Not angry. Not amused. Just present, in the way that some people are more present than others, like they take up the exact right amount of space in a room. You must be one of the new associates, she said. I opened my mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. I'm so sorry, I said. I was on the phone. I didn't know you were. Behind you, she finished calmly. I know. A pause. Zoe Adeyemi. She extended her hand. I shook it like a person who had not just described her to her face. Imara. I managed. Imara Cole. She nodded once, like she was filing that away. Then she walked out of the break room with her coffee, her blazer, and what remained of my dignity. I stood there for a long moment. Dammy, I said quietly into the phone. I heard all of that, she said. She heard all of that. I know. I put my phone in my pocket and stared at the ceiling. She was the head of creative. She was my boss. And I had just told her she was possibly terrifying, possibly beautiful, definitely the kind of woman who ironed her blazers, and oh, I had also mentioned that she was single. To her face. In a break room. On her first day. The rest of that morning passed in a slow, internal crisis. I sat at my desk doing absolutely no work and an enormous amount of pretending to work. My screen showed a floor plan I had been looking at for 40 minutes without retaining a single measurement. Every time I heard footsteps near the creative wing, my spine did something involuntary. My colleague Tun dropped a folder on my desk around 11. Have you met Zoe yet? He asked. Briefly, I said carefully. She's something, he said, nodding like he had just made an important observation about the weather. Very calm. The kind of calm that makes you feel like you've done something wrong even when you haven't. That is accurate, I thought. She asked about the Ferreira project in her first hour, he continued. Hadn't even set up her computer yet. Just walked in, looked at the mood board, and asked why the lighting concept didn't match the client brief. He shook his head with something between admiration and fear. Barker couldn't answer her. Barker was a senior associate who had been here 6 years. I nodded like this information was new to me and not a confirmation of everything I had accidentally said about her. Tund left. I went back to staring at the floor plan. At noon, an email appeared in my inbox. From her. Imara, please stop by my office at 2 p.m. I'd like to review your current project assignments. I read it 4 times. It was a completely normal email. There was nothing in it, no edge, no subtext, nothing pointed. It was the kind of email a new manager sends to new staff in the first week. So, why did my hands feel like they belonged to someone else? Her office was in the corner of the 4th floor, glass-walled on 2 sides, which should have made it feel exposed but somehow made it feel like it belonged to someone who had nothing to hide. She was at her desk when I knocked, reviewing something on her screen. She looked up immediately.
Close the door, she said.
Not unkindly. I closed it, sat across from her, put my portfolio on the table between us because I needed something to do with my hands. She leaned back slightly in her chair, looked at me, and for one terrible second I thought she was about to address the break room. Tell me about the Ferreira project, she said instead. I exhaled internally. For the next 20 minutes, we talked about work. Just work. She asked careful, precise questions. She listened to my answers fully before responding. She didn't interrupt, didn't finish my sentences, didn't perform interest. She was just genuinely, quietly interested. And somehow that was more disarming than anything else she could have done. At one point, she turned her screen to show me a reference image. She was pointing at a structural detail, explaining something about the ceiling concept, and I realized I had stopped listening to the words and started listening to her voice instead. The cadence of it, low, unhurried, like she had all the time in the world. I caught myself and looked back at the screen.
You follow, she said.
It wasn't a question. Yes, I said, which was partially true. She studied me for a moment, not unkindly, more the way someone reads a page they're not sure about. You're good, she said. Just that. Then she looked back at her notes. You second-guess your instincts too much. It shows in the revision history. Stop doing that. I didn't know how to respond to that. Not because it was wrong, but because it was exactly right. Okay, I said. She closed the folder. Meeting over. I stood to leave. Imara. I stopped. She hadn't looked up. She was making a note on something, pen moving in careful, deliberate strokes. For what it's worth, she said, still writing, the Harlow Tower project took 3 weeks. Not 2. I felt heat crawl up the back of my neck.
She looked up then.
And there was something in her expression that was not quite a smile, but occupied the same space. Brief, controlled, gone in a second.
You can go, she said.
I walked out of her office feeling like I had survived something I didn't fully understand. The next 2 weeks were professional. Extremely professional. She ran the creative department with a precision that was almost architectural.
Meeting started on time and ended on time. Feedback was direct and specific. She had a way of pointing out a problem that made you feel like the solution was already obvious. You just hadn't looked at the right angle yet. People respected her quickly. Even the ones who had been resistant about a new head coming in from outside the firm. I stayed out of her way. Not because she was unkind, she wasn't. But because every time I was in the same room as her, I became acutely aware of the break room, of what she had heard, of the single word she had let through that small, controlled, almost smile. I was careful. I was quiet. I was entirely, studiously professional. And then she started noticing me, not in a way anyone else would catch. Not obviously, but I caught it. The way her eyes found me first when she walked into a team review. The way she asked for my input specifically, by name, when she could have opened the question to the room. The way she paused sometimes mid-sentence when she was looking at something I had done, like she was deciding whether to say more than she planned to. Small things. The kind of things that could mean nothing. The kind of things that felt like everything. The first time we were alone after the office hours was an accident. It was a Thursday, 7:30 in the evening. The floor had mostly emptied. I was still at my desk finishing render corrections on the Castellan project because the deadline had moved up without warning, the way deadlines do when they want to ruin your Thursday. I heard her before I saw her. Heels on the floor, unhurried as always. She appeared at the edge of my desk, coat over her arm, bag on her shoulder, clearly on her way out. She stopped when she saw the screen. Castellan, she said. Deadline moved, I said. She put her bag down, pulled the chair from the empty desk beside mine without asking, and sat down. Not close, but close enough. Show me what you have, she said. I turned the screen toward her. For the next 40 minutes, we worked. She didn't take over. She asked questions, made suggestions, let me decide what to do with them. It was collaborative in a way I hadn't expected from someone who seemed so certain about everything. At some point, our chairs had shifted without either of us noticing. Close enough that when she leaned forward to point at something on the screen, I could smell her perfume. Something soft and dry like paper and something warmer underneath. I focused very hard on the render. There, she said, pointing at a corner element. That's the one that's wrong. Not the ceiling line, that one. See it? I looked. She was right. How did you? I started. It catches the light incorrectly, she said. The client will see it the moment they walk in, even if they don't know why it bothers them. She leaned back. Fix that one, and the rest holds. I fixed it. She looked at the corrected version for a moment. Nodded once. Go home, Imara, she said, standing. You've been here since 8. So have you? I said, before I could decide not to. She picked up her bag. And there it was again, that not quite smile. I have fewer people looking over my shoulder, she said. Then she left. I sat there for a moment with my hands on the keyboard. I was in trouble. Not career trouble. Not the kind I should have been worried about given who she was and what she was to me professionally. The other kind. She texted me 4 days later. I didn't have her number. It appeared in my phone with just her name, no preamble, like she had simply decided this was happening. The corner element on the Castellan file. You corrected the angle but not the depth. It'll show under directional light. Fix it before you send tomorrow. I stared at the message. Then I typed back. How did you catch that without the file open? A pause. Longer than I expected. I looked at it again when I got home. Something about that sentence sat strangely warm in my chest. She had gone home and looked at my file again. I typed. I'll fix it tonight. Her reply came immediately. Don't stay up. 2 words. Entirely professional. I read them 3 times. The next morning, before I could overthink, I sent the corrected file with a note. Fix the depth. Also caught a light bleed on the east wall you didn't mention. Already corrected that too. Her reply took 4 minutes.
Good eye.
I put my phone face down on my desk, so I would stop looking at it. It didn't work. The messages didn't stop. They evolved. Work-related first, always. A question about a project, a note about a deadline, a reference image she thought I should look at. But gradually small things slipped in. Things with no professional purpose at all. A picture of a building facade she passed on her lunch walk. No caption. Just the image, as if she assumed I would understand why she sent it. I did. A message at 10:30 one night. What do you think about negative space in residential interiors? Not for a project. Just curious. I typed back. I think most designers are afraid of it. They fill space because silence makes clients nervous. She replied immediately. Yes, that's it exactly. Then, a minute later. You think well. I held my phone and said nothing to the empty room because there was nothing to say. The feeling in my chest had graduated from warmth to something with weight. She was my boss. She was senior to me by 12 years, by title, by every professional boundary that existed. And she was texting me at 10:30 to ask what I thought about silence. The first time the dynamic cracked open was a Monday morning. There was a full team review, 12 people, the long table, the kind of meeting that runs over time because nobody has the courage to say the thing that needs saying. We were reviewing the Marchetti proposal. I had a concern about the structural concept that had been bothering me since Friday, but I was junior, and the concept belonged to a senior associate named Kwesi, who had been at the firm longer than I had been out of school. So I said nothing. Zoe was running the meeting. She walked through section by section. When she got to the structural section, she paused. Does anyone have a concern about this part? She asked. Silence around the table. Her eyes moved. Steady, careful. They landed on me. Imara, she said. My name in a room full of people felt different than my name in a text message. The load distribution, I said carefully. The west side carries more than the east, but the material choices don't account for that. Long term, you'll see movement. Nobody spoke. Kwesi looked at his papers. Zoe looked at the drawing for a long moment. She's right, she said simply, then moved on. Kwesi fixed it by Wednesday. He was professionally gracious about it and personally not, which is the standard behavior of people who know they were wrong. But I thought about the way she said my name. The way she had looked directly at me before the room had a chance to make me invisible. That evening a message. You should speak up sooner. I typed back. I'm junior. It's not always my place. Her reply was quick. Your observations don't have a rank. Don't shrink yourself to make other people comfortable. I read that message until I had it memorized. She started stopping at my desk. Not obviously. Not in a way that created talk. Just sometimes on her way past, she would slow, glance at my screen, ask a single question, listen to the answer. Move on. But the pauses were getting longer. And then one Tuesday, she stopped, looked at what I was working on and didn't say anything about the work at all. You came in early again, she said. I like it before people arrive, I said. It's quieter. She nodded, like this confirms something. Do you like working here? She asked. I looked up at her. Not an expected question. Not a management question. I like the work, I said. I'm still deciding about everything else. She considered that. That's honest, she said. You asked honestly, I said. Something shifted in her expression. Not the almost smile. Something quieter. Something more careful. I did, she said. And then she walked away. But I noticed she walked slower than usual. The evening that changed everything happened without a plan, which is how these things always happen. The firm had a client event, the kind where you dress up and stand in a beautifully lit space and talk to people about design in a way that makes it sound more philosophical than it is. I didn't want to go. I went because attendance was noted. I was standing near the window with a glass of water when I felt someone step beside me. Not behind me this time. Beside me.
Zoe.
She was wearing something in deep green that made the whole room feel like a backdrop. She looked straight ahead at the assembled crowd, not at me. How are you finding it? She asked quietly. I've spoken to 4 people, I said. 2 asked if I was someone's assistant. She made a sound. Low, brief, the closest thing to a laugh I had ever heard from her. What did you say? She asked. I said yes, I said. It ended the conversation faster. This time she actually laughed. Quietly, just barely, but real. The sound was so unexpected and so warm that I turned to look at her involuntarily. And I caught the tail end of it. The way her face opened just briefly, the way the composure broke for a single second before she gathered it back. She felt me looking. She turned. We were closer than I realized. The ambient noise of the event wrapped around us. The light was doing something generous. Neither of us moved. Imara, she said. My name in a different register than the meeting room, different from the text messages. Quieter. More careful. Yes, I said, though she hadn't asked a question. She looked at me for a moment that lasted longer than a professional moment should. Then she looked back at the room. Don't let people make you small, she said softly. Even here. Especially here. I didn't say anything because I understood she wasn't talking about the event anymore. We stood there a little longer than necessary, side by side, close enough that her arm was almost against mine. When she moved away to speak to a client, she touched my arm once, briefly. The lightest possible contact. But I felt it for the rest of the evening. I told myself it meant nothing on the walk home. Then I told myself it meant nothing when I lay in my bed at midnight, replaying the sound of her laugh. Then my phone buzzed. You left early. I stared at the ceiling.
Tired, I sent back.
A pause. Did the evening feel as long to you as it did to me? I read that message very carefully.
Twice.
Longer, I replied. Another pause. Longer this time.
Get some sleep, Imara.
I put the phone on my chest and stared at the dark. She had felt it too.
I didn't know yet what that meant.
I didn't know what was on the other side of it. I only knew that something was happening that I had not planned for, had not prepared for, and could not seem to talk myself out of. And for the first time since the break room, I wasn't embarrassed. I was paying attention. The thing about realizing someone feels something for you is that it changes how you occupy a room. I had always been the kind of person who arrived places and quietly arranged herself to take up the least possible space. Sat near exits. Spoke when spoken to. Kept her instincts to herself unless the work demanded otherwise. It was a habit I had built so slowly, I stopped noticing I was doing it. But after that evening, after her arm almost against mine and the text at midnight, something shifted in the way I moved through the office. I sat up straighter in meetings. I spoke before I was called on. I stopped revising my opinions before I offered them. It wasn't dramatic. Nobody announced it. But Tun noticed. He stopped by my desk on a Wednesday morning and said, "You're different lately." And when I asked what he meant, he just shrugged and said, "You take up more space. It's good." I thought about Zoe, saying don't shrink yourself. I thought about it more than I should have. She was careful after the event. Professionally careful. The messages continued, but she kept them tethered to work more deliberately. A project question here, a reference link there. Nothing that could be mistaken for what it was becoming. And yet, the way she wrote to me was different from how she would write to anyone else on the team, and I knew that because I had seen her send team-wide messages and they were efficient, neutral, clear. Mine were different. The Hansen file is due Friday. Also, how do you take your coffee? I'm doing a run. It's not a management question. I'm just near the machine. I read that message in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon and smiled at my screen for longer than I meant to. Black, 1 sugar, I sent back. It's not a complicated order. I know that's disappointing. Her reply came while I was still looking at the phone. I prefer uncomplicated. I put the phone down and did not pick it back up for 20 minutes because I needed to behave like a professional person in a professional building. When she set the coffee on my desk 30 minutes later, she didn't say anything. Just placed it, glanced at my screen, nodded once like she approved of what I was working on and walked away. I wrapped both hands around the cup. This was a problem. The complication arrived on a Thursday, the way complications usually do, quietly, with a pleasant face. Her name was Renee. She was a senior associate from the Paris satellite office, visiting for 3 weeks to collaborate on the Beaumont International project. She was sharp, effortlessly stylish, and she had known Zoe for years. That much was immediately clear from the way they greeted each other. Easy, warm, the kind of comfortable that only comes from shared history. I watched them from across the open floor. They stood together near the glass wall of Zoe's office, talking, and Renee laughed at something Zoe said. Zoe smiled, a real smile, wider than the almost one I had catalogued. The kind of smile she didn't produce in meetings or in careful text messages. I looked back at my screen. The floor plan in front of me suddenly held very little interest. That afternoon, Renee joined the Beaumont project review. She sat 2 seats from Zoe, and they worked in the particular shorthand of people who had collaborated before, finishing each other's professional thoughts without needing full sentences. It was efficient. It was impressive. It felt like watching a language I didn't speak. After the meeting, I stayed back to gather my things slowly. Zoe was talking to Renee near the door. As I passed, Zoe glanced at me.
Imara.
Good catch on the east elevation today.
Thank you, I said.
Renee looked at me with pleasant, assessing eyes.
Imara.
The one who caught the Marchetti load issue. She mentioned it, I said, before I could decide whether that was information I wanted to offer. Renee smiled. Smart eye. Then she turned back to Zoe. I walked out. That evening no message came. I told myself that was normal.
She was busy.
She had a colleague in town. There was no reason a message should come every evening. I checked my phone at 11:15. Nothing. I put it face down and went to sleep. She texted at 7 the next morning. You were quiet in the review yesterday. I stared at the message before I had even made coffee. I said what needed saying. I typed back. You had more. I could tell. I sat with that for a moment. That she could tell. That she watched me closely enough to know when I was holding something back. It wasn't the right moment, I replied. When is? I didn't answer that immediately. I made coffee. I stood at my kitchen window and looked at the early morning and thought about the way she had smiled at Renee, open and unguarded, and felt something I didn't want to name. I'll tell you when I figure that out, I finally sent. Her reply came after a pause. Fair enough. I'll wait. The week Renee was there, Zoe was less available in the small ways that had become quietly significant to me. No late evening stops by my desk. Fewer project texts that slipped past professional into something else. She was not cold, she was never cold, but she was contained in a way that felt deliberate. I understood it. Intellectually, I understood it. That didn't stop me from feeling the absence like a specific, textured thing. On Wednesday of that week, I was in the break room. Again. Apparently that room was determined to be the site of every important moment in my professional life. Renee came in while I was making tea. She poured water. Didn't make it uncomfortable, but I felt her take a small inventory of me the way perceptive people do when they're curious about someone. You've been here what, 2 months? She asked. 7 weeks, I said. She nodded. Zoe talks about your work. I kept my hands busy. That's good to hear. She's particular, Renee said. Not as a warning. More like a fact being offered. She doesn't pay attention to people she isn't genuinely interested in. Professionally. A small pause. Or otherwise. I looked at her. Her expression was neutral, pleasant, entirely unreadable. I should get back, she said, and left with her water. I stood in the break room for a moment. Or otherwise. 2 words dropped like a stone into still water. I avoided the 4th floor for the rest of that afternoon. I found reasons to be in the archive, the sample library, the printing room, anywhere with a door, and a reason to be there that was not the open floor where I might have to navigate whatever had just happened in the break room. It didn't work. At 4:30, a message. Are you avoiding the floor? I stared at my phone in the archive room surrounded by material samples and fabric swatches. I'm doing research, I typed. In the archive. For 3 hours. It's a thorough project. A pause. Then my office. 5 minutes. I put my phone in my pocket and stood there for a moment. Then I walked upstairs. Her office was quiet. The floor had started to thin out. It was late enough that people were filtering toward the lifts. She was at her desk when I knocked, but she stood when I came in, which she didn't usually do. She gestured to the small sitting area near the window rather than the desk, 2 chairs, a low table. More informal. More deliberate. I sat. She sat across from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Outside the glass wall, the remaining staff moved past occasionally. In here, it felt separate. Contained. Renee said something to you, she said. Not a question. She said you talk about my work, I said carefully. Zoe looked at me steadily. I do. She also implied something else. A pause. What did she imply?
Zoe asked.
I met her eyes. That your interest in me isn't purely professional. The room was very quiet. Zoe looked at me for a long moment. She was doing the thing she did, reading carefully, deciding how much to give. Renee is perceptive, she said finally. She's also direct to the point of being occasionally irresponsible. Is she wrong? I asked. The question sat between us. Specific. Honest. The kind that doesn't allow the other person to redirect. Zoe exhaled slowly. She looked at her hands briefly, then back at me. No, she said. She's not wrong. My heart did something large and inconvenient inside my chest. I'm your boss, she continued. Her voice was measured, careful. I'm 12 years older than you. You've been here less than 2 months. Every single thing about the situation is a reason to not say what I just said. You said it anyway, I said quietly. I said it because you asked directly, and I don't lie to people who deserve honesty. She held my gaze. That's not the same as saying I know what to do with it. I nodded slowly. What would you do with it if the situation were different? She was quiet for a moment. That's not a useful question, she said. The situation isn't different. I know, I said. I'm asking anyway. She looked at me like she was weighing something. Then she said quietly, I would have asked you to dinner 3 weeks ago. The words landed softly, but they landed completely. Neither of us spoke. Outside the glass, a colleague walked past, glanced in without interest, kept moving.
Zoe, I said.
She shook her head gently. Not a no more, like she was trying to stay level. I need you to understand that I am not someone who does this carelessly. I have never, she stopped. Started again. There are lines I don't cross. That's not performance. That's how I'm built. I know that, I said. And I did. It was written into everything she did, every careful choice, every controlled moment. So you understand why I can't. I understand why it's complicated, I said. That's not the same as understanding why it's impossible. She looked at me. Something moved in her expression, something I hadn't seen before. Not the almost smile. Not composure. Something unguarded and fleeting. You're very difficult, she said softly. You noticed me in the break room on your first day, I said. You walked in, heard a junior associate describing you to her best friend, and instead of addressing it, you simply told me you steam your blazers. You've been noticing me since before you knew my name. I paused. I don't think I'm the difficult one. Silence. Then she laughed. Not the brief, contained sound from the event. A real one. Warm, slightly helpless, like I had caught her doing something she hadn't planned. She pressed 2 fingers to her mouth as if to contain it. It didn't help. When she looked at me again, her eyes were soft in a way I hadn't seen before. You've been thinking about that since day one, she said. Every single day, I said. She shook her head slowly, but she was still almost smiling. What am I supposed to do with you? Nothing right now, I said. I'm not asking you to do anything. I just didn't want to keep pretending the conversation we needed to have wasn't the one we were always having. She held my gaze for a long moment. Neither did I, she admitted. That was enough. Not a beginning, not yet, but enough. The following week passed differently. Not changed on the surface. We were still professional in every visible way, still the correct distance in meetings, still speaking to each other about work in front of others with the appropriate formality. But underneath it, something had been named. And named things behave differently than unnamed ones. The messages came back in full. Easier now, less guarded. She sent me a picture of a narrow street in the city she had walked down at lunch. This proportions is perfect, she wrote. The way the width relates to the height of the buildings. Nothing wasted. Send me the location, I wrote back. I want to see it. She sent it. The next day at lunch, I went. Stood on the same corner she had stood on. Took my own picture from the same angle. I sent it to her with no caption. Her reply came in seconds. You went. You were right about the proportions. A pause. Then, that made my afternoon. 3 words. I read them over and over until they stopped feeling as large as they were. Renee left at the end of her 3rd week. On her last day, she stopped by my desk, placed a card on it, a small architecture studio in Paris, her name on it. If you ever want to collaborate from that side of things, she said, you're good. Zoe has an eye for talent. She also has other eyes, but those are not my business. That unreadable smile again. Good luck, Imara. She left before I could respond. I held the card for a moment. Then I put it in my desk drawer and went back to work. 3 weeks after our conversation in her office, she asked me to dinner. She didn't build up to it. No hints, no careful airing. Just a message on a quiet Friday afternoon. I know we said nothing right now, but I'd like to take you to dinner. Not as your manager. As someone who has been thinking about you since a very specific morning in the break room. You don't have to say yes. I'll understand. I read the message 3 times. Then I typed, tell me where and when. Her reply was immediate. Saturday.
7.
I'll send the address. I put my phone down. Then I picked it back up.
Zoe.
Yes. Steam or iron. A long pause. Then steam. Always steam. Get some rest, Imara. I laughed out loud in my apartment for the first time in a long time. Alone, at my kitchen table, laughing at my phone like someone who had completely lost the plot and found something better on the other side of it. Saturday arrived, and I changed 3 times, which felt like a personal tradition at this point. The restaurant she chose was quiet, warm, the kind of place that understood that good light was a design decision. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table, and she stood when she saw me. A small, formal gesture that felt oddly tender. You came, she said. Did you think I wouldn't? I asked. No, she said. I just wanted to say it. We sat. The evening started carefully, the way a first honest thing does after a long period of careful dishonesty. But it loosened quickly. She asked me real questions about where I grew up, what made me choose architecture, what I was afraid of professionally, what I wanted in 5 years. She asked the way she worked, attentive, specific, retaining everything. And she answered when I asked her back. She had grown up in Ibadan, studied in London, spent 6 years in practice before she understood that she wanted to lead rather than execute. She found management harder than design, and more satisfying. She had been lonely in the years she focused entirely on work and hadn't admitted that to herself until recently. Recently when? I asked. She looked at me across the table.
A Tuesday morning, she said.
In a break room. When a junior associate I had never met described me to her best friend in enough detail to make me realize someone had paid attention to things I thought I kept invisible. I felt warmth spread through my chest. I described you as possibly terrifying, I said. And possibly beautiful, she said. In that order. I noticed. You noticed the beautiful part? I noticed you said it like it embarrassed you to admit it. Not like a casual observation. She tilted her head slightly. That's what made me stay, and hear the rest. I stared at her. You stayed on purpose, I said. I heard your voice and was going to leave. Then I heard the tone shift. She looked entirely calm saying this, which was almost more disarming than if she had been nervous. I'm very aware of tone. That whole time, I said. You let me shake your hand and introduce myself and apologize. You are doing so well, she said, and the warmth in her voice made me laugh. You could have said something, and missed watching you survive it with remarkable composure? She raised an eyebrow.
No.
I shook my head slowly. You are actually terrifying.
And, she said.
And, I said, I stand by the other thing too. Something shifted in her expression. Warm, careful, open. The most open I had ever seen her. Good, she said quietly. We stayed at that table until the restaurant grew quiet around us, until the staff were doing the gentle, polite things that staff do when they want you to leave but are too professional to say so. We talked until conversation stopped being a vehicle for information and became its own reason for being, two people who had been careful for months, finally choosing not to be. When we left, she walked beside me on the pavement outside. The city was doing its late-night thing. Sparse traffic, amber light, the specific quiet of a city that hasn't quite gone to sleep. She reached for my hand, not hesitant, not asking silently, just certain, warm fingers closing around mine like it was the most natural continuation of the evening. We walked like that for a while. I need to tell you something, she said. Okay, I said. I have been professionally responsible my entire career. She said it plainly, without drama. Every decision I have made in a workplace has been considered, appropriate, and clean. I have never done anything like this. I know, I said. I need you to know that. Not as a disclaimer. As context. She looked at me. Because it means that when I say I think you're worth the complication, I have thought about it carefully. I don't say things I haven't examined. I thought about every precise thing she had ever said to me. Every message that was constructed to say exactly what it meant and nothing it didn't. I know that too, I said. She squeezed my hand once. Then we figure it out, she said. Together, I said. Together, she agreed. Figuring it out was not simple. We both knew that and didn't pretend otherwise. The firm had no explicit policy against relationships between staff, but it had the thing that matters more than policy. A culture of perception, where what people saw shaped what they believed, and what they believed shaped how they treated you. If it became known that I was involved with the head of creative, every good thing I had earned would be questioned. Every project, every praise, every catch I had made in a meeting room. That mattered to me. Zoe understood that it mattered to me, and she would not let me minimize it. You don't have to protect me from this, I told her one evening, weeks in, when we had fallen into a quiet rhythm of stolen Thursday dinners and Saturday mornings and the particular intimacy of people who talk to each other more honestly than they talk to anyone else. I'm not protecting you, she said. I'm protecting the work. Yours. It deserves to stand alone. She said it so directly that it sat in me for days. She was not trying to make me smaller. She was trying to ensure that when people saw what I built, they saw the builder. It came out eventually because things like this always do. Not dramatically. Not via the break room or a public confrontation. But in the quiet, inevitable way that happens when two people stop working very hard to pretend. It was Tund, unsurprisingly. He came and stood by my desk one morning and said, "Are you and Zoe?" and stopped. I looked at him. He made a small gesture that didn't need completion. "Yes," I said. He nodded slowly. "Then, you did the Marchetti catch before any of that, right? Like, genuinely on your own?" "Long before," I said.
He nodded again.
"Okay. Then it's none of my business." And that was that. He never mentioned it again, never made it a topic, never made me feel small about it. I was grateful to him for that, in a way I still am. Others noticed eventually. Most were professional about it. A few weren't, and their particular form of not being professional was the low, speculative kind, the quiet reassessment of my value. Is she here because of merit questions that appear in some people's eyes when they think you can't read them? I could read them. I brought it to Zoe. "I know," she said. "I see it too." "Does it bother you?" I asked. "What bothers me," she said carefully, "is that you have to prove something you already proved before I ever touched your hand. That's not fair. It makes me angry on your behalf." I looked at her. "But," I said. "But you will prove it again," she said. "Because that's who you are. And eventually the people who are watching will have so much evidence that the question will feel embarrassing to them." "You're very certain," I said. "I've been watching you since day one," she said simply. "I'm not guessing." The Castellan project launched 4 months after I had stayed late on a Thursday correcting a depth issue because a deadline moved. The client event was in a space we had spent 8 months rebuilding from a concept that had nearly collapsed under its own structural assumptions. I stood in the finished room and looked at the east wall. The light fell correctly. The corner element caught it clean. Everything held. Zoe came to stand beside me. "There," she said quietly, looking at what I was looking at. "That's the one we fixed." "You fixed it," I said. "I was just still in the office." "You caught the light bleed I didn't mention," she said. "Remember?" I remembered. She looked at the room for a moment. "This is good work, Amara." "Our work," I said. She considered that, and I saw her decide to accept it. "Our work," she agreed. She didn't touch me. We were professional, visible, appropriate. But she stood close enough that our arms almost touched, in the way they had that first evening at my desk, back when I was trying very hard not to notice things I was noticing. I noticed everything now. I leaned toward her, just barely, just enough.
She stayed.
Later, walking out of the building into the cool evening, she reached for my hand. No checking the street. No measuring the risk. Just warm, certain fingers. "I owe you dinner," she said. "You've bought me dinner approximately 9 times, I said. "That was different," she said. "Those were Thursdays. This is a celebration." "Of what?" She looked at me. That expression, the open one, the one I had first seen in a restaurant on a Saturday 7 months ago, and had since learned was the one she kept for moments that mattered. "Of being right," she said. "About the project?" I asked. "About you," she said. I held her hand tighter. "You were right since day one," I said. "Since before," she said. "Since a Tuesday morning in a break room, when someone called me possibly beautiful and then looked like she wanted the floor to absorb her." "I maintain that was the floor's failure," I said. "Structurally, it should have provided more support." She laughed. The real one, the warm one, the one I had been cataloging since the first time I heard it at a client event when I was still pretending not to want things I clearly wanted. "You're going to be extraordinary," she said. Not like a prediction. Like something she already knew. And walking beside her in the amber light, her hand in mine, the finished building behind us holding its own weight correctly, I believed her. Not because she said it, because I had stopped shrinking myself long enough to see that she was right.